Local Officials Day at the Legislature 2020. Every year, this is an event that the Utah League of Cities and Towns puts on. Brings the youth city councils from all over the state of Utah up to the Capitol to spend time with their legislators. In conjunction with those kids coming up, you have all the local elected officials, so mayors and councils from across the state of Utah. All 249 cities and towns in the state of Utah are members of the League of Cities and Towns. So we get a whole bunch of them coming up to kind of kick off the session that just started Monday. So it's a great time to start off the session and meet with your legislators and talk about the issues that'll be coming up over the next 45 days. Yeah, so here's the neat thing about this conference is it coincides really close to the Silicon Slopes Tech Conference, right, held in Salt Lake City, which is attended from people all over the world, thought leaders and business leaders alike. Mark Zuckerberg speaking this year at Silicon Slopes, and now here the kids are getting to experience that, and that stuff is really cool to them. What might not seem so cool to kids is government, right? And so you're bringing kind of two thoughts together and saying, okay, how can we be effective in both spheres? One may be cooler than the other, but both play equally important roles, right? Government can affect business in such negative or such positive ways, right? And so it gives me a whole lot of hope to see a bunch of youth here being willing to get involved, see that politics necessarily doesn't have to be a dirty word. It really means getting in and serving people. And so if they're focused on that, which they've already done in so many aspects in Spanish Fork, I mean, the Youth City Council, that they are already service-oriented. And so encouraging them, take that service-oriented mentality that you've been taught by your parents or wherever you've learned it from, and take it into the next steps of your career. Don't stop at high school. Don't stop just because it might look good on a resume, but continue to be involved throughout college, throughout your life. And again, the excuse of I have a full-time job and a family is not going to be good enough. We're going to call on you to step up, step out, be in the arena when it's time to help, because we need your help.
Thank you for participating in the Utah League of Cities and Towns 2020 Local Officials Day. Please welcome to the stage Cameron Diehl, Executive Director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns.
Welcome everyone to Local Officials Day. We at the League of Cities and Towns represent all 249 cities and towns in this great state, and in the room today we actually have youth council members from almost 50 cities and towns around Utah. We provide a unified voice at the Capitol about matters that are important to local government. Thank you to Silicon Slopes and Clint, who you'll hear from for a moment, for hosting us on the eve of their Tech Summit. Every attendee, in fact, can actually return tomorrow. If you take your league badge, you can go register for Silicon Slopes, and you'll be able to return tomorrow for their Tech Summit, which is really an incredible opportunity for all of us. So make sure you grab that registration before you leave. And speaking of events, even though we still haven't finished Local Officials Day, we have now opened registration for our mid-year conference in sunny St. George at the end of April, which is after the legislative session has ended. So we invite you to participate both in the Tech Summit and in our conference in the spring. Today I have a special message, though, for the three different groups we have in the audience today: the youth councils, our city leaders, and our state elected officials. First, I want to give a special welcome to the youth city councils in attendance. We have more than 500 of you with us today. In fact, it was not that long ago that I was a member of the Murray City Youth Government. That's right, Murray right there. And I attended Local Officials Day that the League hosted in 1999 and 2000. Go ahead, do the math. So it's an honor for me now to be part of the organization that hosts Local Officials Day. Even more special is the fact that my wife attended Local Officials Day when she was the mayor of the Farmington Youth City Council. And our 2-year Farmington, where are you at? That's right. And our 2-year-old daughter celebrated her first birthday last year at Local Officials Day. So this is a very important event in our household. You as youth council leaders are not just the current leaders of your high schools, but you're the future leaders of our community. So that's why we welcome you today. Second, welcome to the mayors and council members and other municipal leaders in the room. By a show of hands, how many of you were newly elected in November? Okay, raise your hands high. Yeah, clap. Let's clap if you're newly elected. We represent 1,385 mayors and council members around the state, hundreds of which were newly elected in November. Whether you've been in office now for a month or a decade, we thank you for your willingness to serve in your communities, and we appreciate your engagement within the League of Cities and Towns. Third, welcome to the members of the Utah State Legislature. Let's give them a round of applause. We appreciate your service to the state of Utah, and we appreciate your partnership with local government, because at the end of the day, we're all in the quality of life business. And the decisions that we're all making together will set the stage for the quality of life, not just today, but of tomorrow. We look forward to working with you over the next 43 days toward those outcomes. So youth council members, municipal officials, legislators, and others, thanks to all of you for making Utah a remarkable place to work, live, and play. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Executive Director of Silicon Slopes, Clint Betts.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
So I'm not a Spanish Fork City Councilman, but if I ever am, that would be the greatest title of my life. I'm from Spanish Fork. Spanish Fork here is Mayor Steve Leifson here. It's good to see you, my friend. Decide what you stand for and then stand for it all the time. A great man once said these words. His name was Clayton Christensen. He cared deeply about living a full and meaningful life and spent much of his encouraging others to do the same. We lost this great man last week. One of Clayton's most impactful teachings revolved around a question. How will you measure your life? Lately, I've been thinking about the impact one person can have. In particular, I've been contemplating the impact my late friend Aaron Valenti had on me. The first time I met Aaron was at a planning meeting for Start SLC, which over time evolved into Silicon Slopes Tech Summit. She believed in me. She supported me. She worked to secure our biggest sponsor, took no credit, and put her reputation on the line by vouching for what this community could become. I wish Erin was here today. I know her impact will be felt over the next 3 days. I think about her all the time. Not her net worth or the title she had, but the generous person she was and how she chose to spend her life in the service of others. Erin knew what she stood for and stood for it all the time. We all have the same opportunity. It's just hard. It requires a level of purpose that can be difficult to sustain, but when you see a person living an intentional life, it resonates. The first person to show me this was possible was my grandpa Betts. I was 14 the night he picked me up to haul hay. He'd spent the day building a sewing room for Grandma. He was tall, lean, alive. We talked a lot that night, lifting bell after bell. I had to tilt my head to the sky to see his face and toothy smile. There was always a piece of straw between his teeth, always fresh. Most days were spent in a granary off Main Street, most nights at the farm managing water. Back then, we talked about water. When it was getting in, who would help it along, how we'd survive until it came back. He never seemed satisfied with how those conversations went, but his crooked smile underneath his crooked hat never faded. Only thing complaining does is make a bluebird turn yellow, he'd say. It was hard to argue when he put it like that. The town, Spanish Fork, wasn't a city yet. He'd drive his old red Chevy with blue doors down the road slow, stopping to drop a bag of potatoes or corn on a neighbor's porch. Children ran to greet him, calling his name. Parents were sure to let him know they'd be happy to pay, but he laughed off such absurd offers. Hugs and firm handshakes, this type of thing could go on all night. He saved our house for last. Sometimes Grandma would come along and there'd be an extra bounce in his step. He'd ignored the stern warnings from Mom about not getting us too wound up, but then again, he never got in trouble. We were sad every time he left, even Mom. He never talked about the president or the stories of people he didn't know that he'd read about in the news. He only wanted to talk family, fishing, and who needed help. That and water. There was never enough water. I wasn't one to jump at the opportunity to haul hay. He'd stop by while the Nintendo 64 was burning up from playing GoldenEye all day. Mom said to turn it off and do house chores or go to the farm with Grandpa. Those were my choices. When he dropped me off back home after the sun had faded, I got out of his old red Chevy with the blue doors and heard him say, "I'll be by tomorrow night with some fish and biscuits, and then we'll fill our bellies like the kings of old and never want for anything again." He died the next day in a car accident on his way home from fishing. Dad and I went to the crash site to look things over and found his wallet. We brought it back to Grandma. The whole town showed up for his funeral, where the local VFW did the honors. Everyone knew his name. I want to be more like my grandpa. I want to be more like Aaron Valenti. And I want to be more like Clayton Christensen, who said, because if the decisions you make about where you invest your blood, sweat, and tears are not consistent with the person you aspire to be, you'll never become that person. Thank you.